Good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. Great. I think I recognise most people around the table, but I'm going to introduce myself again. My name is Paul Griffiths. My colleague Simon Barclay. We're the inspectors appointed by the Secretary of State to independently examine the City of York Local Plan 2017 to 2033, which from here on in will probably be referring to as the plan or similar. You'll have also met or been in touch with Carol Crooks, our program officer. She's going to go through the housekeeping matters in a moment, but I'll come to that shortly. As most of you will know, no doubt, our task is to consider whether the plan meets the requirements of the 2004 Act as amended and the associated regulations, and given the point at which it was submitted, whether it is sound in the context of the now otherwise superseded 2012 version of the National Planning Policy Framework. Forgive some of my typographical errors on the MIQs about that. As far as these particular hearing sessions are concerned, this is phase 3, phase 4 in September, where the intention is to cover affordable housing and housing mix and density today. We're moving on to universities, hopefully tomorrow, student housing on Thursday, and then after that, in following weeks, we get onto strategic and non-strategic sites. I'll probably just briefly touch on the way the hearings work. They're a structured discussion. We'll tend to lead, but we'll generally follow the matters and issues paper that's been circulated well in advance. There's no separate agendas or anything like that. We will invite the council to make an opening statement at each hearing, should they so wish. After that, we'll invite people to speak at particular times. If you have something to contribute to the conversation, the convention is to put your nameplate on end, and hopefully we'll be able to read them. I do have my glasses. Now, the timetable has been kept relatively tight, so we would ask that everyone focus on the important matters. There'll be a mid-morning break, mid-afternoon break, if necessary, and a longer break for lunch. Carol, are you ready to do the housekeeping? Go ahead.
Good morning. Regarding fire, there's no scheduled fire alarm tests during the planning inquiry, so if the alarm sounds, please make your way to the nearest exit and gather on the corner of Claremont Terrace, which is outside the GMB building. Do not stop to retrieve any belongings, but exit the building as quickly and safely as possible following the green fire exit routes. Do not enter the building unless a fire marshal or member of the fire brigade tells you to do so and it is safe. Regarding door security, please only use the main doors which are there to access and exit the building. For security purposes, do not use the side doors unless you are a wheelchair user and someone is available to unlock and relock the door after exit. Do not let anyone into the building who you do not know. York City Church or Citadel staff are generally available to ask if you are unsure. There are other building users, so please be aware that Citadel staff will be working during the planning inquiry, and there are also CYC language classes taking place in here, so there will be other users in the building. The toilets are situated on the ground floor in the corridor adjacent to the hall, which is just through there. Should any of the facilities need attention, please let a member of York City Council or Citadel staff know. Drinking water is available in the main hall. We've got a table just there for attendees, and in the foyer for the members of the public. We've got water around the table. If you do run out, if you let me know, because obviously it's going to be a warm day, we can get them replenished. Other refreshments, Gilligate has a range of good coffee shops and places to get something to eat. There's also a Sainsbury's Express on Bootham. Just a reminder about filming. As you can see, there is a camera in the middle of the room and it is being filmed. If anybody has any issues with being filmed, if you can contact me and let me know, we can see you in a location where you're not picked up on filming. Final issue is Wi-Fi. The details are there on the door and on the wall there. It is Citadel Guest and the password is General Booth 1883. If you have any other issues, I'm the programme officer and the programme officer is up there on the first floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. That's very helpful. What I'm going to suggest we do now is go around the room so that everyone can introduce themselves to the hearing, and then we'll get on with things. I'll start at this end.
So, David Elvin, Queen's Counsel, as you know, with Matthew Henderson. Mr. Linus is sunning himself in Greece for Phase 3, so I'm going to make sure that the burden of Phase 4 falls on his shoulders. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Laura Bartle, York City Council's Principal Planner.
Good morning. Justin Gardner. I'm told I do have a nameplate to come at some point, but for now. I've been working with the local authority over some years, and also ICNE projects in looking at affordable housing need.
Paul McColgan, ICNE projects, working on behalf of the council, looking at affordable housing need and overall housing need.
Good morning. Tom Marshall for Porter Planning and Economics. We were commissioned by City of York Council to undertake a viability assessment of the local plan to make sure it's in line with the MPF and that the plan policies cumulatively do not hinder deliverability, of which affordable housing is one such policy.
Good morning, Catherine Jukes, Directions Planning.
Morning everyone, Stuart Natkus, Barton Wilmot on behalf of Barrett and David Wilson Homes.
Morning, Mark Johnson Mowat on behalf of Redrow and Taylor Wimpey.
Morning, Joanne Harding from the Home Builders Federation.
Good morning, Emma Winter from Carter Jonas on behalf of L&Q Estates.
Good morning, Michael Pavlovic, City of York Council, on behalf of the York Labour Group and the York Labour Party.
Good morning, Nick Fell from Rapley's on behalf of British Sugar.
Morning, Neil Jones, consultant to Rapley's, also on behalf of British Sugar.
Dave Merritt, York and District Trades Union Council.
Eamon Keogh here on behalf of Galtres Garden Village Development Company.
Good morning, Ian Lates here from Caddick and Oakgate Group on behalf of Langwith Development Partnership.
Good, that's very helpful. In which case I'm going to hand over Mr. Elvin if there's anything you wanted to say to begin the conversation.
No, other than to say that Ms. Bartle will be dealing primarily with the policy questions 1.5, 1.6 and 1.7, and ICNE will be dealing with the initial, the need figures. And this is in the context that the final housing needs report was updated and issued at the beginning of this month and is on the website CYC 92. So there is up-to-date data on the current housing needs, and that will be that accounts for why, as you'll have seen from our hearing statement, the net affordable housing need has been increased to 592. So are you content to kick off then with the... I've got no opening statement or anything of that description, so if you're content to kick off with the first group of issues.
Yes. I'm happy to do that. Simon?
Thank you. Yeah, so let's turn then to matter one, affordable housing. So, yeah, 7 hopefully fairly simple questions to answer this morning. And if we turn to those in order. So if I go first then to issue 1.1, what is the need for affordable housing? Mr. Elvin has just obliquely sort of referred to that, but if the council could just briefly explain to us what it says the need for affordable housing is and give a brief explanation of the evidence underpinning that, I'd be grateful.
Yes, before handing over to colleagues, it's worth just, I think, outlining the Council's position and rationale for commissioning the latest evidence that has been published. Clearly recognising that the evidence relied upon in the submitted plan and the SHMA and the affordable housing need, which it relates to, is now somewhat dated, and there was a clear requirement to update that evidence. The council was also very keen to make sure that it was making best use of its resources in updating the evidence. So the work was undertaken both with a view to supporting the local plan at the stage that we're in the examination, but also in acknowledging the change in definition in the NPPF and the widening of the affordable housing need requirement. So it does stray into those aspects as well, but that's quite a deliberate intention to make sure that the evidence is as long-standing as it can be for the council's purposes, but it is also fundamental to the evidence required for the local plan too, and as Mr. O'Loughlin will outline, provides a clear basis for the updated position on our housing needs.
Thanks, Laura. So the need for affordable housing has been updated, as Laura mentioned, in the July 2022 Local Housing Needs Assessment, which is reference number EX/CYC/92. Specifically, if I can take you to Chapter 4 of that report, it sets out the updated calculation, which broadly follows the same approach as the 2016 SHMA, but with updated evidence from the Housing Register, as well as updated evidence on house prices, stroke rents in the city, as well as earnings. The key table, which sets out the affordable housing need calculation, is table 4.9, which can be found on page 39 of that document. That essentially brings together the different stages of the calculations as set out in the relevant guidance, whereby the current need is established as well as newly forming households, i.e. newly forming households which have an affordable housing need, and then existing households falling into need. That includes through sickness, through illness, etc., that they suddenly require an affordable home. That gets us to a total gross need of 955. From that, we subtract the relet supply of general housing as it comes back into the market through vacancy. Once that's subtracted from the gross need, it gets us to a net need of 592 affordable homes per annum. Now, this compares to the previous assessment in that SHMA from 2016, which is SD 051, which showed an affordable housing need of 573 affordable homes per annum. That's set out in table 36 of that document. The conclusion is that even with this updated evidence, while the affordable housing need has increased, it's only really increased marginally from 573 per annum to 592 per annum.
Just so I'm clear, does that calculation include homes lost through right to buy?
It doesn't include a specific step for homes lost through right to buy. However, through the relet supply, the reduced amount of affordable housing which is relet as a consideration. To give you an extreme example, if all affordable homes were lost through the right to buy, then that relet supply would obviously be zero because there'd be no homes left to be relet.
So a marginal, you say, increase on the need identified in the 2016 Schmar. How would you describe that need, Mr. McColgan? Is it quite large, is it quite pressing, or is it something else?
It's a fairly substantial level of affordable housing need, but I mean, I think we can answer answer what should be done with that level of affordable housing need in the coming questions.
Is anyone here to raise any questions about the methodology used by the council? Are you indicating there, Mr. Merritt?
Yes, I was. It was also a wider procedural issue. There were an enormous number of documents uploaded on Friday. Hundreds of pages. I was at work yesterday and I had 2 existing commitments this weekend. I virtually had no chance to read and absorb all the level of information that is in here. Now, obviously, I don't want to disrupt the inquiry, but could I ask that we are able to submit some written comments when we've actually had a chance to fully absorb what is in all those documents? That was my first point. In terms of the question you're specifically asking at the moment, I think one of the issues that we're aware of course, is the large number of people who work in York but can't afford to live here. In the discussions we've had at the Trades Council, we know that in local employers there are increasing numbers, particularly under 40, who work in York but simply cannot afford the house prices or the house rents in this city. And we're not sure that the council's methodology properly recognises that issue. There is an assumption that's stated elsewhere in the documents that the council assumes that, in effect, the commuting in and out balances as it has done in the past. We suspect that assumption is no longer true, based on our own sort of anecdotal experience in workplaces in York. And therefore, there's actually a large demand, including for affordable housing, that isn't catered for in this method.
Just on your query, Mr. Merritt, about being able to submit written comments, we'll give some thought to that, and we'll get back to you and let you know what we think.
Thank you.
Mr. McColgan, the point that Mr. Merritt was making then about the methodology not picking up on some particular elements of potential demand.
Yeah, so two responses to that. First of all, the overall housing need, as has been established in previous sessions, is significantly above the demographic baseline. Through that, it would necessitate additional migration into the area, and we would expect that would include people who couldn't afford to live in the area previously and would be able to do so now. However, on the specific point on the affordable housing need,
my apologies, Mr. McColgan. I suspect it's the heat, but I'm being exceptionally thick this morning, and I didn't quite follow that. Could you run that past me again?
So the overall housing need as you know, we established a demographic baseline which would include a certain level of migration, just continuing historic trends, but the housing requirement is some way above that level of demographic need. And because we're providing additional homes above the demographic need, they will need to be filled by someone, and we would envisage that they're filled through a combination of improving household formation in the area, but also improved migration into the area. Increased migration into the area.
So is that in effect then to say, in the terms of the PPG, because the PPG points to particular things that should be looked at when arriving at an OAN, including market signals and the rest of it, and among those things listed there is affordability.
Yeah.
So I think what you're saying to me is, well, okay, if we took the demographically derived OAN, added an uplift for affordability, it would still be lower than the need that we have arrived at because that's based on an economic uplift. Is that right?
That's correct, spot on. Just on the other point, with regards to the affordable housing need, that includes newly forming households, which would include people moving to the area for the first time. So, in essence, some of the groups that Mr. Merritt's referring to in terms of they can't afford to move to the area, this picks that up through the increased migration to the area. But also the current need also includes people that would have a local connection to the area, including those who are working in the area who don't live in the area as well. So they are picked up in the calculations in a number of different ways.
So could I just add to that the point that's made in the hearing statement? Although, of course, we're under transitional provisions, we took the wider definition of housing need so far as affordability is concerned from the latest guidance. So it adopts a more generous approach to housing need for affordable housing than the guidance at the time of the transitional provisions would have required.
Mr. Merritt, are you? Okay, thank you. Right, I'm going to have to apologise here and now to everyone sitting more than 2 metres away from me because I simply can't see the nameplates. So do forgive me. Yeah, I've not a chance of reading that, I'm afraid. So it might help if you just, when I bring you into the conversation, if you can just remind me who you are, I'd be grateful, thanks. So please.
Thank you. Yeah, it's Councillor Pavlovic. I've got a couple of questions. This report was prepared using estimated data. We now have some census data, which contradicts certainly some of the demographics that we've seen from York. 2 questions, really. One, have you taken the actual census data that came out on the 28th of June into account? Because there are some really quite stark figures for York in respect of what you can extrapolate from it in respect of affordable housing. And the second one is, clearly when this report was prepared, we weren't in quite the throes of the cost of living crisis that we are now entering, and I suspect will get markedly worse within, which will increase the numbers of people that are going to find themselves unable to continue to live in private rented, for example, or that are subject to Section 21 evictions.
Would you like me to respond to that? Yeah. So in terms of the census data, what was actually published was population counts for the city itself. It didn't break down. It didn't break down the detail into anything other than age categories and by sex as well. So they don't typically feature in the calculations for affordable housing need, which are drawn on the latest household projections, which again don't take into account the latest census data. In terms of the cost of living crisis, we've sought to use the most recently available data on earnings and the cost of rents, etc. But I think that's something that the Council will accept as an issue, but through the monitoring and through future updates, that will be picked up.
Could I possibly just ask a supplementary? Thank you. And thank you for that response. But there are the breakdowns within the age brackets as published within the census that really are quite concerning. For example, a 19% drop in the 0 to 4s, a reduction in the minus 8% in the 25 to 29-year-olds and minus 13% in the 40 to 49-year-olds. These are the people that would be forming the families that clearly aren't. And when you compare them to other comparator cities and towns, both on size and on economics, York is a massive outlier. So have you taken that into account, and will you, for example, produce an addendum at some time to the report to take the latest data into account? Because it would be helpful, I think.
Yeah, and we don't necessarily disagree that would be helpful. I think we're sort of we need to follow the guidance itself, and the guidance itself relates to, in terms of newly forming households, projections of housing need, and those are already published. So, whereas there may be updates to those projections to reflect lower levels of need, as there has been since 2014, they will, in time, feed through into updated calculations of affordable housing.
So I'm afraid it's just one of those things. The data is constantly being updated, and we do our best to keep up with it. But as Mr. McColgan's just indicated, that will be the subject of future monitoring and updates in due course.
Mr. Merritt.
Yeah, if I could follow up on that. I think I've also looked at the census data, and it is very clear, and it confirms what we have, what's been said in a lot of our submissions, that basically families have been priced out of the city. If you simply follow the data, then you reduce the provision in the plan, rather than what you actually need to look at is what is going on. We are forcing families out of the city. And therefore, it actually highlights why there needs to be more provision, both affordable and overall, in order to stop that happening. Because in effect, virtually the whole of the population increase in the last decade between censuses has been in the over 55 age group. So basically, it reflects what we've been saying, that most of the housing that's been built in the city has been going to the high end of the market, and providing for wealthy retirees, downsizers from London, all the rest of it, and we are not meeting the actual local housing need through the proposals in this plan.
So as you all know, this isn't just a question of applying raw figures. The housing needs assessment is a somewhat more sophisticated exercise, has already been indicated, and as you know, and that will be done as we have done to date with the most up-to-date figures that we had when the report was compiled. I mean, clearly you don't just say, well, these households have reduced. You look at what the need is and you take account of those considerations.
Mr. Merritt, just on the point that you raised about, I think the phrase you used is that people are being priced out of the city. Is that a question of affordability as well as purely about affordable housing as such?
It's across the piece, and it goes quite a long way up the pay scale. You know, it goes right up to people in professional jobs. I'm a civil engineer by profession. I work in a local consultancy. We do bridge assessments and so on. And virtually nobody in our office under the age of 40 lives in York. The older generations who've been here for some time are, in effect, have been able to stay in York because that's where they had the roots. The new generations simply cannot afford to live in York. So that's my personal experience of the upper end of the market. But in the discussions I've had with colleagues, we know that's exactly the issue in a lot of the lower paid jobs, that people can't afford if they haven't got a council house and they are at the mercies of the private sector rentals, where our bottom quartile rents are exceptionally high. Basically, you end up commuting from Selby, from Driffield, from West York, parts of West Yorkshire, the Pontefracts, the Castlefords, all those sorts of places, or from in the northeast. Some of the anecdotal information we've picked up from our internal discussions, people commuting from Middlesbrough, people commuting really serious distances, several hours a day, 2 hours each way, that sort of thing. That's what's really going on, and that's the problem, that the rules and the processes here aren't properly recognising that.
Well, that, if I might just say so, that is a criticism of national policy and how it categorises need, and it's an issue with house prices, which, as we know, can be acute in particular areas of the country. House prices doesn't necessarily equate to the definition of the need for affordable housing. That has got to be done in accordance with national policy, which is what we followed. I mean, we're not unsympathetic to the problem, and we've all come across it. But we have to follow the government approach to affordable housing. As I've said, we've already expanded our approach rather than sticking to the transitional provisions, but taken the wider meaning of affordability that's now in current policy.
Yeah, I was going to ask just before you said that, Mr. Irvine. I mean, is Mr. Merritt's description or the picture that he paints a picture that the council recognises, or do you not agree with him on that?
Yes, I don't think there's anything in that we would fundamentally disagree with, but as Mr. Alvin has just outlined, it's the mechanism in which we go about assessing in the context of which we're required to.
And just so I'm absolutely clear, we are straying a little bit from the question of affordable housing, because it's partly about affordability, this, isn't it? But just one last question on this point, so I'm absolutely clear. I think you're saying that in terms of affordability, that is addressed in the identification, the setting of the OAN and the uplift that's been applied in relation to economic aspirations?
Yes, correct, yes.
And so you say, do you, tell me if I've got this wrong, that in terms of national policy and guidance, therefore, that the Council is doing what it is supposed to do?
Indeed, yes. We certainly would agree with that. And the requirement that we are proposing, as we debated at the last phase, is significantly elevated above that demographic point to capture exactly those points.
Councillor Pavlovich.
Thank you, and I will get to that point as to whether the Council is doing the right thing for a future question, I think 1.3. But just to support the points that Dave Merritt's made is, you know, if you look at York's population, it grew by 2.4%. You look at Selby's, it grew by 10.8%. And as lovely a place as Selby is, I suspect one of the reasons that it's grown as much as it has compared to York is that the housing is markedly more affordable there than it is in York.
Okay, this is starting to feel to me like the right time to move on to the next question, actually. Is there anyone, though, that wanted to dwell any longer on issue 1.1? Marvellous. Okay, in which case then, issue 1.2. Does the provision for affordable housing in the plan properly and pragmatically reflect the identified need? If I can hear again, as we are, seems to be a tradition now, so we'll hear from the Council first of all.
Okay. To answer that question, yes, and through policy H10 and GB4, the local plan seeks to maximise affordable housing delivery, and that's based on the viability of different types of schemes. So they've sought to seek the maximum number on a wider range of schemes than perhaps is typically seen in a local plan. Now, while they have maximised that level of need, I think the Council are pragmatic enough to recognise that they're perhaps not meeting the affordable housing need in full. However, as established in the King's Lynn judgment, specifically King's Lynn and West Norfolk versus the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government and Elm Park Holdings 2015, that's EWHC 2464, Mr. Justice Dove stated that this consideration of an increase to help deliver the required number of affordable homes rather than an instruction that the requirement is met in total is consistent with the policy in paragraph 159 of the framework requiring that the SHMA addresses these needs in determining the FOAN. Now, as I mentioned, the Council have sought to address affordable housing need as much as they can through maximising delivery to the level to which it is viable in different types of schemes.
The fundamental point you're making there, Mr. McColgan, I think if I've understood you correctly, is that national policy, you say, doesn't demand that all of the identified need for affordable housing is met through the plan. Is that right?
That's correct, although the Council should seek to address it as best as they can, and I think that's the Council's position, that that's what they're doing.
How many new affordable homes does the Council anticipate this plan would deliver?
That figure is provided for in the affordable housing note that was published back in 2020, which is CYC EX 36. Now, clearly, we've since that point updated our trajectory and supply figures to better reflect where we are at this point in time. And we are...
yeah, there are some modifications proposed as well, aren't there, ahead of this series of hearings that may well have a bearing on the timing of delivery. Is that right?
Indeed, yes, yes. So we would refer back to that as published, and the calculations that we've undertaken provisionally in the context of the updated trajectory and where we are don't deviate significantly from that. So 3,600 is the anticipated delivery through the supply calculations, and that's table 10 in that document, which, as I say, we've provisionally updated that 3,600.
3,600, sorry, is that in the plan period?
So that, yes, to be clear, that's in the plan period up to 2033, not the extension that we were sometimes referring to as well.
Okay, so I think what you're saying to me is that we don't have currently, because there's been a bit of change in the council's thinking on this just recently, hence some of the proposed main modifications. So because of that, we don't currently have an entirely up-to-date trajectory, so you can't be absolutely precise about the figure that you would expect, but that nonetheless it's going to be in the same sort of ballpark that you were looking at previously in 2020, which was 3,600. Is that right?
Yes, I'm just trying to scroll down to the right table. Bear with me. Apologies. Yes, that's correct. Yes, and clearly, given where the council is and where we are in the examination and the change and shift in delivery expectations, there is some adjustment in the phasing of the calculations, but we've undertaken to consider what's coming forward through committed supply as well, which is why the figures align somewhat more closely than might otherwise be assumed, given that delivery is shifted to the back end or towards the later end of the plan period.
Yeah, so we do have, I mean, I don't want to over-egg this particular pudding, but we do have a bit of a movable feast slightly here, don't we? And we're going to, in due course, be talking about sites, individual proposed sites in the plan, which, who knows, may even lead to some further changes. Ultimately, though, we are going to need, once we've been through all of that, I think is probably the best point for you to provide this, we are going to need an up-to-date trajectory that also shows affordable housing delivery during the plan period. And it might be helpful, actually, if that even goes beyond the plan period so that we can see what's happening beyond as well. But I suspect that it's probably not going to be quite helpful. If you could whip one out of your back pocket now, it might not be that helpful in any event.
Yeah, which is why we haven't published that for quite those reasons.
Okay, so for today's purposes, though, you say sort of, well, around, I mean, you know, it's not a precise science, but around 3,600 is the kind of area, the kind of ballpark that the council anticipates.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, does the plan set that out?
As submitted, the plan isn't exceptionally clear in that regard. A modification was proposed, I think, in one of the previous modifications. Forgive me, I can't recall. I think it was the April 21 versions. Nevertheless, we are seeking to ensure that that's clear in the plan and proposing a modification to address that. I do believe that we've included it in the latest set of modifications. If that's not the case, then indeed we would seek to modify to make sure that that is made clear.
Yeah, I mean, should the plan be clear about, what the identified need is and what the plan anticipates being delivered towards meeting that need? Be absolutely clear on both of those things.
Yes, I think that there should be an acknowledgement of that. And as I say, that there has been some iterations of modifications that have tried to address that, and we will certainly ensure that the latest set are clear and provide an up-to-date provision of the need and the supply in a way that is not or is easy to comprehend, and it has the additional affordable housing need made apparent too.
Yeah, I'm conscious that I'm taking perhaps a little step back to question 1.1 myself now, but apologies. But yeah, so if, as you say, that the plan should be clear about what the need and supply are, should that be some sort of requirement or target or whatever you want to call it?
The council, sir, would favour, I think, a target in that respect and would be expressed in those terms.
And if I can just add, a target would reflect the sort of flexibility position and the position in national policy, but it would also mean that it wasn't a requirement which could, it was something which could, of course, be exceeded if circumstances allowed. Yeah.
Just for my note, would that be something that would appear in policy SS1, for example?
Yes, that was what I was just thinking.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fine. Excellent.
Okay, so yeah, I think what I'm going to do for the purpose of our discussion is actually to include issue 1.3 in this, because we might as well. I think it links closely with issue 1.2, so let us not hold back on issue 1.3 either. So just so everyone's clear, I'm taking issues 1.2 and 1.3 together. So roughly you say 3,600. Can you just remind me how that compares to the overall identified need?
So that would compare to an overall need in the plan period for 9,472.
Have you got that by multiplying 592 by the plan period?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, sorry, yes. So, is there?
Okay.
Yeah, mental arithmetic never was my strong suit, but I'll let you do that exercise and tell me the answer, Mr. Elvin. So the supply, then, even with my mathematical disability, it is quite clearly below 50%, isn't it? Where are we roughly with that? I do like a good percentage, Mr. Elvin, yeah. So when we say that national policy doesn't require the plan to meet all of the identified need, is it right that in this case, in fact, it's falling some considerable way short?
Yes, the council wouldn't differentiate from that position. It's quite evident.
Is that a problem?
It's an issue that the council has and must address as best possible through the local plan, and the overall housing requirement has sought to consider and make a judgment on this very matter, and in the context of this very pressing need, as we've just established. My colleague, Mr. Gardner, will explain the council's approach to responding to that need in the context of the requirement that the plan has set.
I just really wanted to highlight, so you've got published now CYC 92. We don't necessarily want to go through all the detailed wording, but at your leisure, maybe you could look at paragraph 4.46 to 4.61 of that document, which sets out how affordable need sits in the context of overall housing need. So recognising factors such as quite a lot of the need is households who do live in accommodation, it's just not suitable for them. So if they were to move home, it would free up another unit. It also highlights the role that the private renter sector plays. So looking at benefit, again, showing that whilst you've got households that ideally you would seek to provide a secure tenancy in, say, social or affordable rented housing, the housing stock is there for quite a chunk of those households. We also note that the affordable needs assessment comes up with an annual figure. And whilst we've multiplied that by 16 to give you a number, the reality is you probably shouldn't do that, because over time, a large chunk of those that are in need are newly forming households. So often grown-up children living with parents, for example. At the time they move, incomes are relatively low. The assessment picks them up as not really being able to afford in the local market. But over time, as income increases, those groups potentially would be able to afford. So there would be an element of households falling out of need, if you like.
So, sorry, if I just to make sure that I understand your point, because I don't want to misunderstand it. Is that then a point about sort of churn and changing circumstances over time?
It is, and I think this is one of the difficulties of, we've carried out an assessment of the need for affordable housing, and actually trying to stretch it across a 16-year period when, you know, as I think you rightly know, things change, is, you know, probably not the right approach to what, you know, whilst you can get to a numerical number, which is neat, 38%, the reality is, I suppose what the needs assessment is saying is that in any given year, these are the number of households we might expect to come forward who can't afford housing. But actually some of those households, you know, later on in that, so if you provided housing now, great, but actually in a couple of years, actually that solution may have been found. I guess, you know, what is the overall conclusion is, yes, there is a need for affordable housing, and it's you know, pretty substantial. Not perhaps as high as we see in some areas in the southeast, but still pretty substantial. So the council, within overall housing delivery, should be seeking to provide as much affordable housing as is possible, which then does sit back a bit on the viability issue. But I just did want to highlight that it's that sort of, you know, trying to make these numerical connections between 592 and 822 a year. Yes, okay, you can divide one number by another to get a percentage, but actually the way affordable housing sits within that overall housing need is actually pretty complex. And again, if you do at some point look at those sections that I highlighted, it was an issue that was raised going back 7 years by the Planning Advisory Service about trying to make these direct links. So I suppose what we've tried to do in this report is actually, we're not saying, you know, actually you can minimise the need because the need is clearly strong, but we're actually saying, do you know what, it's far more complex. It's a far more complex issue.
Yeah, I understand that, absolutely. Just something I just need to check, though. So you have taken the sort of annualised figure that the work that you've done gives you and multiplied it by the plan period, and you said you probably shouldn't do that. Well, you have done that. I just want to check that you think that, despite what you just said, that is a legitimate approach that is in line with the PPG.
Well, I don't think it's an approach that's in line with the PPG. I think I suppose it's an approach of identifying, you know, sort of, I suppose, the relative need that you've got in York, perhaps compared to other locations. You know, it does give you an indication that yes, affordable housing is a serious and pressing issue here.
Well, I'm asking because, you know, the figure that you arrive at there, the 9472, isn't it? The need figure. The council has just agreed should be a target in the plan, and I just want to be sure that if we're going to recommend that as a main modification in our report, that it's a legitimate target to set.
Are we actually planning to have that number as a target?
My apologies. The need figure would be set out, and the supply 3,600 would be set as a target.
I think text, you know, could certainly reflect on, I suppose, the various evidence. I guess the council will be going away and thinking about wording for that in terms of setting out a need within that local plan. I suppose it does need to also be recognised that the assessments will be updated periodically. The numbers do clearly change, and yes, as at this most recent assessment, that numerical calculation would lead to that number.
I think, Mr. Gardner, what you're doing is sharing with us the sensitivities around this kind of work and the sorts of issues that lead to that type of work to need to be updated reasonably frequently, aren't you? I think that's what you're doing.
It certainly does need to be monitored and considered on a fairly regular basis.
And is that monitoring Is there, you say, Mr. Gunner, yeah, you know, it does need to be monitored on a regular basis. Is that something that the plan provides for?
In its current form, as submitted, it's not to my knowledge, but it clearly can do and should do, and we would propose that it did. And we could look to the phrasing of that in the revision to policy SS1 and the explanatory text around that to make that abundantly clear how that would work.
Okay, I don't want to do plan making on the hoof, but just in general terms, is that sort of something that would say that, you know, this is a situation that needs to be monitored and indicate some kind of frequency, and also indicate what might be done depending on the results, the outcomes of that monitoring?
Absolutely, yes. I equally didn't want to propose wording on the off the top of my head, but on the basis of those principles, yes.
Essentially, the monitoring would be reviewing the target on a periodic basis and seeing what the implications were for the target and for delivery.
In a way that the plan already does in the monitoring section for other matters. Yeah, great.
Okay, if I could ask the Council just to add that and the other few points that we've picked up this morning to the running schedule of main modifications. Okay, so just to return to the PPG, so I'm thinking if it helps you to see into the dark recesses of my mind in PPG terms now, if I can find it. Yeah, this is paragraph 2A029. So it's a little bit further on from the bit that talks about market signals and affordability. Sorry, it's what is the total need for affordable housing?
What's the full ID?
It's I hate these. It's 2A-029-20140306. Yeah.
Can you hang on a second while I go back to the national?
Yes. It's a good day out. I shall look forward to that. Thank you, Mr. Alvin. Yeah, okay, so just for the benefit of everyone else, so that we don't all have to travel through the National Archives together, I shall just read out this one paragraph of the PPG, and it's under the question, what is the total need for affordable housing? And after saying something that's not entirely relevant here, it says, the total affordable housing need should then be considered in the context of its likely delivery as a proportion of mixed market and affordable housing developments, given the probable percentage of affordable housing to be delivered by market housing-led developments. An increase in the total housing figures included in the local plan should be considered where it could help deliver the required number of affordable homes. And it's that last sentence, really, that has prompted our question at issue 1.3. and just so everyone's clear, it says, an increase in the total housing figures included in the plan should be considered where it could help deliver the required number of affordable homes. Here, as the council happily or freely concedes, the proposed, or the anticipated rather, supply is considerably short of identified need. And so my simple question is, has such an increase in the total housing figures included in the plan been considered by the council?
Yes, the council has given due consideration to what was clearly an acute need, and we have considered over the course of the plan's preparation higher housing requirement figures in the context of plan's preparation, and that was discussed at previous phases, and the relationship to the sustainability in that context, appraisal in that context. The uplift that has been proposed in the context of the housing requirement, as we've talked about before, was considered in the context of the affordable housing needs, and colleagues will no doubt be able to elaborate on that and how we considered that to incorporate an element of requirement for some of the housing needs in that context. So we have assessed it. We've considered higher figures, but they are not found to be sustainable and deliverable in that context.
If you just bear with me a moment. The higher figures, are you talking about in the sustainability appraisal or somewhere else?
Yes, the alternatives that were considered, yes, through the sustainability appraisal. If you require specific paragraph numbers, I'd have to come back to you on that. I don't have them to hand.
And so higher figures, you say, would not be sustainable or deliverable. Is that quite right? Or is it that they might be less sustainable than the plan that is proposed?
I understand the point, yes.
And just while you're thinking about it, I wonder whether it's right to say not deliverable.
Perhaps not. Sorry, David.
I think to be fair to Ms. Bartle, we'll need to check exactly what the sustainability appraisal says. But the target proposal in terms of policy should deal with this to a significant extent, because if individual sites can deliver more, then of course there's no reason why they shouldn't. It'll obviously, as usual, be down to individual viability appraisals for specific proposals coming forward on the allocated sites.
Yeah, okay. In about 20 minutes or so, I'm going to take our morning break. So I don't know if that will give you enough opportunity to have a quick look at the essay. If not, fine. I don't think it's a hugely important point, perhaps.
We'll certainly get it back to you over the course of today. There's a hell of a lot of essay, as you know. I spent a lot of time wrapped up in this in responding to full phase 2, but I'll have a look through.
Okay, I think, Ms. Bartle, you were looking to pass the ball on to someone else. Was it Mr. McColgan?
Yes, yeah, I just would say that in that context of the sustainability appraisal and looking at our supply, the council has proposed or is proposing through the PAN significantly higher supply than the requirement figure, which again would provide additional contribution to the affordable housing through the proportionate provision that's made on that additional supply.
So notwithstanding that, as has been mentioned in the earlier sessions, we don't think that the affordable housing, the overall housing need should be uplifted to address affordable housing need. Firstly, the Kings Lynn case, as mentioned previously, doesn't necessitate that affordable housing need should be met in full. It's also that this is a consideration rather than a requirement. As demonstrated earlier in earlier questions, the affordable housing need has not changed significantly. Therefore, our position remains the same from the OEN session, that the affordable housing need shouldn't have any increases on the objectively assessed need.
Councillor Pavlovich.
Thank you very much. There's a lot to go out there. But I'll start perhaps at the back and work my way forward. The sustainability thresholds of 20% on brownfield and 30% on greenbelt is a political decision. It was not an evidence-based decision. It was a decision made by the administration of 2015 to 2019. And you raised the question of how can supply be increased, and that would be the obvious option for me. You increase the thresholds. Viability is less of an issue in York, given the market prices that are achieved. So a higher percentage would be absolutely achievable, and that's something that we have done a great deal of discussion with developers and with registered providers.
I want Councillor Pavlovich just to head you off at that particular pass, just for now, in terms of the thresholds I've forgotten the number, but in the policy. Thanks. In policy H10, if we can just park that just for a moment, and if I can stick reasonably strictly to 1.1 and 1.2 and 1.3.
Yeah. Can I just also challenge the point that was made, and I'm really sorry with respect, I can't remember the chap, not from ICNI, the chap next to him.
Mr. Gardner.
Mr. Gardner. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Mr. Gardner. He made a comment around household formation, saying that if you, within a couple of years, you may move from unaffordable to affordable. But their own data on paragraph 4.19, figure 4.1 table, indicates what the reality in York is, and that's over 50% of the population earn under £40,000. And given the economy of York and how it's geared around retail, hospitality and tourism, you're not going to see, for the vast majority of people, that massive wage increase, because essentially they're working at average wage levels, and that's unlikely to change. So their affordability threshold is going to reduce as house prices go inexorably upwards. So I would dispute those comments, and that's why I do feel that the figures in respect of affordable need are probably going to stay static. But if supply is that far out, less than 50% of supply is less than 50% of need, that gap is going to get progressively bigger over the plan period. And that's why we need to find solutions that are going to actually address the gap.
Just so I'm clear, Mr. Pavlich,